The engine works like this. You get as many Sobble as you can into play, and when you evolve your Sobble into Drizzile from your hand, then the Shady Dealings ability triggers to search a trainer card. When you evolve your Drizzile into Inteleon from your hand, well, the ability triggers again. Using multiple copies of Scoobabnet, you can recycle the evolution line and make sure that you have exactly the right amount of Sobble and Drizzile in play to keep chaining the Shady Dealings ability. The ratios for the deck are as follows. The max copies of Sobble, which is 4, followed by 3 to 4 copies of Drizzile. Oftentimes, decks get away with 1 copy of Inteleon, but if your engine is completely focused on the Shady Dealings engine, having a second copy doesn't sound too bad. Next, we have 3 to 4 copies of Level Ball and Evolution Incense to make sure we find and set up the early Sobble and Drizzile into our board. Level Ball lets us grab both Sobble and Drizzile as they have less than 90 HP, so it serves a dual purpose in the setup. Similarly, Evolution Incense can grab any Evolution Pokemon, and both Drizzile and Inteleon are Evolution Pokemon, another value card. Paired with 3 to 4 copies of Scoobabnet to recycle our engine by picking up the whole line to our hand so we can re-evolve any of our Pokemon, we have the ingredients for one of the most consistent and novel engines in the Pokemon trading card game. Now that we've gone over the engine briefly and the ratios needed to put this into a deck, let's go into what these cards do and why they're so good. The Shady Dealings engine was first introduced in the Sword and Shield base set with Drizzile and Inteleon coming into the game with the ability. This was the first time that something like this had been introduced into the game, especially with Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon having the same ability but with slightly more powerful effects. Let's take a closer look at the key players in this engine. Sobble is one of the starter Pokemon in the Galar region, so it only makes sense that it would be printed in the Sword and Shield base set, but that's not something too special to speak about with the first print in a Sobble. The Sobble that made the Shady Dealings engine so popular is released in the Battle Skies expansion. It was printed with a Rapid Strike style tag. Now, while that isn't particularly special, what put it over the top was Sobble's attack Keep Calling. Keep Calling allowed the player to get 3 basic Rapid Strike style Pokemon and put them onto their bench for a single colorless energy. This meant that you can grab all 3 of the other Sobble in your deck, and all of a sudden, your board was set up and ready to do some Shady Dealings. The attack does end your turn, meaning the attacking Sobble probably won't make it to the next turn, but don't worry, we've got 3 more ready to go to get the job done. It also helped fuel other Rapid Strike style strategies because Sobble could now fetch your attackers as well as your support Pokemon with a single attack. Sobble evolves into Drizzile, which has the first instance of the Shady Dealings ability. Shady Dealings says that when you evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may search your deck for 1 trainer card and put it into your hand. Now, the key word here to note is trainer, not item, not support, but trainer. This basically meant that over half of a player's deck was now searchable from this one evolution, which means you can grab anything you want whenever you want, which is one of the best abilities in a card game. Evolution in Pokemon can only happen a turn after that Pokemon has been in play, which means that you cannot evolve Sobble into Drizzile the turn it enters play, or a Drizzile into Inteleon. However, with multiple Sobble in play already, a player can play down a Drizzile on each of these Sobble to fetch multiple trainer cards in the same turn to set up a combo turn. Level Ball and Evolution Incense both help find Drizzile, as Level Ball gets a Pokemon 90 HP or less from your deck, which conveniently Drizzile has 90 HP, and Evolution Incense gets an Evolution Pokemon from your deck. The final key player in the Shady Dealings engine is Inteleon, the Stage 2 evolution of our little Sobble. The text reads almost the exact same as Drizzile, but with one key difference. Inteleon lets you grab 2 trainer cards from your deck as opposed to the 1 that Drizzile can provide. Inteleon could only be searched with Evolution Incense, Ultra Ball, or Irida, but that's more than enough ways to find it. Inteleon also has a serviceable attack, Aqua Bullet. Aqua Bullet does 120 damage and places 20 on the bench for a water and colorless energy, decent for cleanup. There was another Inteleon introduced in Chilling Rain that was often played as a one-of to add bonus damage to the board with its Quick Shooting ability. Quick Shooting allowed a player to place 2 damage counters on one Pokemon once per turn, so this could allow you to hit the numbers needed to take those knockouts. An inclusion that saw less and less play as time went on, but it was an option nonetheless. Now that we've introduced the Inteleon line that supports Shady Dealings, let's talk about how it all works together. The first step is to grab Sobble and use Keep Calling to grab the rest of the Sobble out of your deck and the base of the engine is set up. Next step is to find Drizzile. This is the trickier part because opponents will be trying to disrupt your hand to stop you from getting the engine fully online. But with the help of cards like Evolution Incense, Level Ball, Ultra Ball, and even Irida, we can find Drizzile and all of a sudden we start digging through our deck to grab whatever we want. Once we have Drizzile, the next step is to go into Inteleon and find more pieces of our combo. We can pair this with Scoobabnet to grab the entire line back to our hand, re-evolve a Sobble that was already put into play into a Drizzile, and keep the Inteleon in our hand for the following turn. In theory, you can grab 6 cards from your deck in one turn if you have multiple Drizzile setups and are ready to go. Okay, we have the whole engine ready to go, but how does this apply to the game? This engine was primarily a support strategy with low offensive power to its name. How can we take this support engine and build ourselves a tournament winning strategy? Let's look at how the engine came into prominence and the decks that it was most commonly featured in. The first instance of Shady Dealings engine come to spotlight was when it was paired with Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. Sobble was a great way to find Urshifu V because it was a Rapid Strike style Pokemon, and being able to find individual trainer cards to create a combo play on any given turn. Rapid Strike Urshifu was a deck that centered around making a big play with G-Max Rapid Flow that would do 120 damage to 2 bench Pokemon and discard all the energies attached to Urshifu. The Shady Dealings engine allowed the deck to be greedy by lowering counts of cards because now you could just grab them whenever you wanted with Shady Dealings. Some of these cards included Karate Belt, which lowered the cost of an attack by 1 fighting energy if you were behind prize cards taken, and Reset Stamp, a card used to create a comeback in games by forcing your opponent to shuffle their hand into their deck and draw the same number of cards as they had prizes remaining. This was the first time that the engine shone and made players rethink how they were building their decks. Why play heavier counts of cards to find them when you could just dedicate 11 to 12 slots in your deck to finding those pieces exactly when you need them? Seems obvious in hindsight. Shortly after this, official in-person tournaments came back and we saw the first set of regionals take place. Arceus V-Star became the immediate partner for Inteleon because of its V-Star ability Starbirth that allowed the player to grab any 2 cards from the deck to their hand. Paired with the Shady Dealings engine, you could, once again, get whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted. The power level of the deck was much lower than a traditional deck, which led to players taking a more outlast and out-resource approach. This deck used multiple copies of Charon's Care to keep cycling Arceus V-Star without letting the Pokemon get knocked out. How did we ensure that we found those crucial supporter cards in the turn that we needed them? Well, the Shady Dealings engine, of course. It'll always fetch you the card you need right when you need it. The engine began making decks look like they were 2 halves of different decks. What I mean by that is that players began playing the best parts of 2 different decks because the Shady Dealings engine could let you play the game in either of the directions, and in theory you had an answer to multiple matchups in the field. Before we dive into one of the coolest decks that the Shady Dealings engine produced, we're going to talk about the most predictable one. Rapid Strike Malamar. The deck also thrived off of Sobble being able to grab NK and Sobble, which were both Rapid Strike style Pokemon. Malamar does 40 damage for each Rapid Strike style Pokemon in your hand that you choose to shuffle back in for a single Psychic Energy. The Shady Dealings engine made it so easy to refill your hand and set up a perfect board with Octillery Rapid Strike that helped you search another Rapid Strike card once per turn with its ability. Every single Drizzile and Inteleon search could act as a plus 40 more damage, creating one of the scariest single prize budget decks that existed for a brief period of time. Now, onto the coolest deck that the Shady Dealings engine produced. The prime example of playing 2 decks in one and the pinnacle of greed based around the engine. At the European International Championships in 2022, a majority of top players all came to the same decision independently. They all played the Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX deck, but paired with single prize dark attackers like Galarian Moltres. These were 2 very different decks at the time that became merged into one, held by the glue that was the Shady Dealings engine. I won't go too deep into the details of this deck because there's a lot to talk about, but the deck at one point was playing 21 different copies of single cards. For a 60 card deck, that's a lot of cards that are only one-ofs. This included supporter cards such as Cheryl for healing, Raihan to make a big comeback play, and even Sonia to help the early game setup. There was a few combo cards included, such as Energy Switch and Tower of Waters to pull off G-Max Rapid Flows out of thin air. This was the height of greed in the Shady Dealings engine's life, because players began finding those niche cards that could make an impact in extremely situational scenarios. This began a period where playing anything that could help gain matchup percentage in certain matchups was viable because you could always search it out on the needed turn with the Shady Dealings engine. Following this incredibly out of left field deck, we didn't see much innovation out of the Shady Dealings engine until the release of Irida in the Astral Radiance expansion. Irida is a supporter card that allows the player to search the deck for a water Pokemon and an item card. This is slightly more restrictive than the Shady Dealings engine that grabbed you any trainer card, but Irida could grab the pieces for the Shady Dealings engine, which meant it basically became a Drizzile or an Inteleon depending on what you needed at that moment. This was the birth of one of the most powerful decks of its time, Palkia V-Star paired with Inteleon. This deck heavily utilized copies of Irida and a full grip of the Shady Dealings engine pieces to search out any of the cards that allowed the players to make combo plays, like Cross Switcher, Echoing Horn, and even cards like Capacious Bucket to get set up. It felt like you could truly do anything with this deck because of how powerful the engine was. This dominance in the format led players to counter it aggressively in the 2022 World Championships, and it still found its way into the top 4 despite the hostile field. Since then, the Shady Dealings engine has shifted to support more of a single price strategy revolving around using Inteleon's Aqua Bullet attack until you could chain Radiant Charizard in back-to-back-to-back turns. Radiant Charizard was a card that came out of the Pokemon Go mini expansion and was extremely powerful. There can only be one Radiant Pokemon in a deck, so making the decision to include Charizard was a full commitment to attacking with it. Greninja was widely considered the best at the time due to how much it helped you set up with its Conceal Cards ability. At first glance, Charizard seems difficult to attack with, but its Excite Heart ability reduces the attack cost of the attack by 1 colorless for every prize card your opponent has taken. Doing 250 damage with its Combustion Blast attack, you could one-shot almost anything in the format with the addition of a choice spell to add 30 damage. Towards the end of the game, players would use Clara to bring back Charizard and Fire Energy to their hand to attack with it multiple turns in a row. If the prize count was at 3 for your opponent, then you could use Magma Basin to accelerate another Fire Energy to Charizard to fulfill the requirements to attack. This deck also played heavy copies of Cross Switcher to gust up the threats on the bench on any given turn that the player was about to use a Charizard to gain tempo. All of these combo plays were only made possible because of the Shady Dealings engine that can set up the player's hand to make those game-defining plays. And there you have it, one of the more novel engines to enter the game and make an impact right away. Giving players some of the most control they've ever had over their own game was incredible and provided some exhilarating combo decks. The Shady Dealings engines might never have something similar and might even go down as one of the best engines in history. Alright, and that's the video. If you have any other ideas for future videos similar to this one, please let us know down in the comments below.